Hello everyone and welcome back to Sleepless Campfire. Tonight, we travel into the forgotten backroads of America, places where light fades and what remains are stories that refuse to die. We focus specifically on sleepovers, those seemingly innocent gatherings of youth that sometimes become encounters with the unexplained. These are accounts drawn from witness reports, police files, and archived broadcasts, each one verified, recorded, and retold in their own words. The sleepover represents a unique space in American culture, a temporary suspension of normal rules, a liminal state between childhood and adulthood, between day and night. It is within these transitional moments that the veil between our world and something else grows thin. The stories we will explore tonight occurred in different decades, in different states, and under different circumstances. Yet they share common threads of inexplicable phenomena that defy rational explanation. What makes these accounts particularly chilling is their documentation through multiple sources, corroborating testimonies, physical evidence, and official records that continue to baffle investigators. These are not campfire tales passed down and exaggerated through generations, but rather contemporaneous accounts of events that left lasting marks on those who experienced them. Now let us begin with our first story. It was late October of 1998 in the small town of Millfield, Ohio. 14-year-old Sarah Jenkins was having what should have been a typical Friday night sleepover with her three closest friends, Jessica, Emily, and Rachel. The girls had gathered in Sarah's basement recreation room, a finished space her father had converted the previous year with shag carpeting, wood paneling, and a small bathroom in the corner. Sarah's parents were upstairs, adhering to the standard sleepover protocol of periodic check-ins, while otherwise allowing the girls their privacy. The evening began normally enough: pizza, horror movies, and gossip about boys at school. Around 11:30 p.m., as the first movie ended, Jessica suggested they try to record a ghost on Sarah's new cassette recorder, a birthday gift from her grandmother. The girls laughed at the idea, but decided to play along, taking turns asking questions into the microphone in the darkened room. They recorded for about 10 minutes before growing bored with the lack of response and moving on to board games. It wasn't until the following morning that they would listen to the full recording. As Sarah pressed play on the small tape player while her friends ate breakfast, they heard their own voices asking questions into the silence. Between Jessica's question, "Is anyone here with us?" and Emily's follow-up, "Can you tell us your name?" there was something else, a voice that did not belong to any of the girls. The voice was faint, almost whisper-like, but distinctly audible upon careful listening. "Get out," it said, followed by what sounded like soft crying. The girls sat in stunned silence as the tape continued, their own voices continuing their game, oblivious to the additional voice on the recording. What made the discovery particularly disturbing was that none of them had heard anything unusual the night before. The basement had been quiet except for their own voices and the movie's soundtrack. Sarah's mother, upon hearing the recording, initially dismissed it as a prank or bleed-through from another recording. But when she took the tape to a local audio specialist the following week, he confirmed something unusual. According to his written report, which later became part of the case file, the additional voice appeared to be on a separate frequency than the girls' voices, something nearly impossible with the recording technology of the time. The specialist noted that the crying sound continued for approximately 3 minutes after the girls stopped recording, though the tape should have ended at that point. The Jenkins family contacted the Millfield Police Department on November 5, 1998, concerned about the inexplicable recording. Officer Daniel Henderson took their statement and listened to the tape, later noting in his report that he found the recording unsettling and difficult to explain through conventional means. The police department kept a copy of the tape, but no formal investigation was launched as no crime had been committed. Local historian Margaret Winters would later discover that the Jenkins home, built in the 1950s, stood on the former site of the county's first orphanage, which had operated from 1880 until it burned down in 1923, killing 12 children and 3 staff members. Historical records showed that the orphanage had been located approximately where the Jenkins basement now stood. Sarah Jenkins, now in her 30s, still has the original recording. In a 2015 interview with a local newspaper, she said, "I haven't listened to it in years, but I keep it in a safe deposit box. Sometimes I think about getting it digitized and analyzed again, but part of me is afraid of what they might find. I know what we heard that night, and I know it wasn't any of us." The case remains one of the most well-documented audio recordings of unexplained phenomena in Ohio history. Multiple audio experts have examined copies of the tape over the years, with most concluding that the recording cannot be easily explained as a hoax or technical malfunction, yet no definitive explanation has ever been offered for whose voice appears on the recording or how it came to be there. In the summer of 2004, 15-year-old Caitlin Morrison attended a sleepover birthday party at her friend Amanda's house in rural West Virginia. The party was relatively small, with just 6 girls total, including the birthday girl. The event was held in the finished basement of Amanda's family home, a space that had been converted into a teenage paradise with posters, a television, and sleeping bags arranged around the room. According to the 5 other girls who attended, the evening proceeded normally until approximately 2:30 a.m., when they decided to tell ghost stories. The Morrison family lived in the area for generations, and Caitlin shared a local legend about the Shadow Man, said to appear in the woods behind homes during thunderstorms. As if on cue, a thunderstorm began outside, complete with lightning and heavy rain. At approximately 3:15 a.m., according to the official police report, Amanda's mother went to the basement to check on the girls and ensure they were settling down for the night. She reported that all 6 girls appeared to be sleeping or trying to sleep, and she returned upstairs. The last confirmed sighting of Caitlin Morrison was by 2 of the other girls, who reported seeing her turn over in her sleeping bag around 3:45 a.m. When the girls woke the next morning, Caitlin was gone. Her sleeping bag was empty, though it appeared to have been slept in. Her shoes, phone, and jacket remained by the basement door. The 5 other girls insisted they had heard nothing unusual during the night, though 2 reported having nightmares about shadowy figures. The Morrison family was contacted at 7:30 a.m. when Caitlin failed to return home as planned. Her parents initially assumed she had decided to stay for breakfast, but when Amanda's mother called to say Caitlin was missing, concern turned to panic. The West Virginia State Police were notified at 8:17 a.m., and an investigation began immediately. Search teams combed the area around Amanda's house, including the woods where Caitlin had told her story about the Shadow Man. A footprint matching Caitlin's shoe size was found near the back door of the house, leading toward the woods, but it disappeared approximately 50 feet into the forest. Despite extensive searches involving helicopters, tracking dogs, and hundreds of volunteers, no trace of Caitlin was ever found beyond that single footprint. The 5 other girls were interviewed multiple times by investigators, with their stories remaining consistent. None reported hearing any unusual sounds during the night, though one girl, 16-year-old Megan, did mention that she had woken briefly around 4 a.m. and thought she saw someone standing by the basement window looking in. She had assumed it was lightning playing tricks on her eyes and gone back to sleep. The investigation into Caitlin's disappearance remains active in the West Virginia State Police database as case file 048912. Over the years, various theories have been proposed: that she ran away, that she was abducted, or that she wandered into the woods during the storm and became disoriented. But none of these theories explain the lack of evidence or the absence of any tracks beyond those 50 feet into the forest. Perhaps most puzzling is a detail that emerged during the initial investigation. The storm that raged that night was localized to the immediate area around Amanda's house. Weather reports from the National Weather Service confirmed that while there was precipitation in the region, the severe thunderstorm described by the girls was not recorded by any official monitoring stations in the area. Meteorologists could not explain the discrepancy. In 2014, on the 10th anniversary of her disappearance, Caitlin's father gave an interview to a local television station. "We've never given up hope," he said, his voice heavy with years of searching. "But we've also never understood how she could vanish so completely from that basement with 6 other people just feet away. The police have been wonderful, but they have no answers. We have no answers. Just an empty sleeping bag and a lifetime of questions." The Morrison family still lives in the same house, and Caitlin's room remains exactly as she left it that Friday evening in 2004. Her case is periodically featured on true crime shows and in missing persons databases. But despite advances in forensic technology and renewed interest in her story, no new leads have emerged in years. The sleepover that began as a typical teenage gathering remains one of West Virginia's most baffling missing persons cases. It was early November of 2011 when two hikers discovered a camcorder in a clearing near Willow Creek, California. The area was known locally as a place where teenagers sometimes held bonfire parties, so finding abandoned items wasn't unusual. What was unusual was that the camera still contained a tape with approximately 40 minutes of footage. The hikers turned the camera over to the Humboldt County Sheriff's Department, not knowing what they had found. The footage, later dated to October 28, 2011, began with a group of 5 teenagers setting up what appeared to be a sleepover in a small clearing. 3 girls and 2 boys, estimated to be between 16 and 18 years old, arranged sleeping bags around a fire pit. They seemed cheerful and excited, with one girl, later identified through school yearbooks as 16-year-old Maria Rodriguez, filming her friends as they joked and prepared for the night. For the first 20 minutes, the footage showed what one would expect from a teenage camping trip. The group cooked hot dogs, told stories, and took turns filming each other with the camera. The audio captured their conversations clearly, including their plan to stay up all night and test the local legend of the Willow Creek Watcher, a Bigfoot-like creature said to inhabit the forest. At approximately 9:45 p.m., according to the camera's timestamp, the group's mood began to shift. One of the boys, identified as 17-year-old Jake Thompson, pointed the camera toward the dense woods surrounding the clearing. "Did you guys hear that?" he asked, his voice suddenly serious. The other teens grew quiet, and for the next minute, the only sound on the recording was the crackling fire and distant wind. What happened next became the focus of one of the most unusual investigations in Humboldt County history. At approximately 9:47 p.m., a low, guttural sound can be heard on the recording, though its source is not visible on camera. The teens react with a mixture of fear and excitement, with one girl saying, "It's real," while another suggests they should leave. Jake, still holding the camera, convinces them to stay, saying, "This is what we came for." The footage continues to show the teens huddling closer together around the fire, their faces illuminated by the flames. The camera work becomes shakier, suggesting Jake is nervous. Over the next 10 minutes, the unexplained sounds occur intermittently, sometimes closer, sometimes farther away. The teens grow increasingly frightened, with Maria eventually saying, "I want to go home now." The final 5 minutes of the footage are chaotic. At approximately 10:02 p.m., something large appears to move quickly through the trees at the edge of the clearing, visible only as a dark shape. The teens scream, and the camera falls to the ground, continuing to record. For the next 2 minutes, the footage shows only the ground and fire, with sounds of struggle, screaming, and the same guttural voice heard earlier. Then, silence. The final 3 minutes of the recording show only the dying fire and the empty clearing. No human voices are heard, and no movement is visible except the flames slowly burning down. The recording ends abruptly at 10:07 p.m. When the Humboldt County Sheriff's Department viewed the footage, they immediately launched a search of the area. The clearing showed signs of a struggle, scattered sleeping bags, a partially extinguished fire, and footprints that appeared to belong to the teenagers. But despite extensive searches, no trace of the 5 teens was ever found. The case took an even stranger turn when investigators learned that none of the 5 teenagers had been reported missing. Their parents, when contacted, reported that their children had said they were staying at each other's homes for the night, a coordinated lie that prevented anyone from realizing they were missing until the camera was found nearly a week later. The Humboldt County Sheriff's Department consulted with wildlife experts who confirmed that the guttural sounds on the recording did not match any known animal native to the region. Audio analysis could not determine the exact nature of the sounds, though experts noted they appeared to have a complex structure inconsistent with typical animal vocalizations. The case remains officially unsolved, with theories ranging from an elaborate hoax to a genuine encounter with an unknown creature. The 5 teenagers were never found, and their identities have been withheld at their families' request. The camera and its footage remain in evidence at the Humboldt County Sheriff's Department, catalogued as Case File 110947. In 2016, a documentary filmmaker attempted to create a film about the case, but abandoned the project after receiving anonymous threats and experiencing unexplained technical difficulties during filming in the Willow Creek area. The footage itself has never been publicly released in its entirety, though short clips have been shown in law enforcement training sessions about evidence preservation. What happened in that clearing on October 28, 2011, remains unknown. The camera continued to record for 3 minutes after whatever occurred, capturing only the dying fire and the empty forest. No additional sounds were captured, no more movement was visible, just the quiet end of a sleepover that became something else entirely. In the suburban town of Lakewood, Michigan, there stands a house at 1127 Blackwood Road that has remained vacant for over 2 decades. The story of why begins with a sleepover in the spring of 1997, an event that would become one of the most well-documented cases of unexplained phenomena in the state's history. The house, built in the 1920s, was purchased in 1996 by the Henderson family, who moved from Chicago with their 2 children, 14-year-old David and 12-year-old Melissa. The house was a fixer-upper, and the family spent several months renovating it before moving in. By spring 1997, they were settled enough for Melissa to have her first sleepover in the new house. On April 12, 1997, Melissa invited 3 friends for a sleepover: 13-year-old twins Samantha and Rebecca, and 14-year-old Lauren. The girls set up sleeping bags in Melissa's room, a large space on the 2nd floor with windows facing both the front and back of the property. The Henderson parents went to bed around 11 p.m., leaving the girls to their own devices. According to the girls' later statements to police, the evening began normally. They watched movies, did each other's hair, and talked about school. The first unusual occurrence happened around midnight when they heard what sounded like footsteps in the hallway outside Melissa's room. When Melissa opened the door to investigate, she found nothing. Her parents were asleep down the hall and the house was quiet. Over the next hour, the girls experienced several more unexplained phenomena. Objects moving on their own, doors opening and closing, and what they described as whispering sounds that seemed to come from the walls. At first, they tried to rationalize what was happening: old house noises, their imaginations running wild, the wind outside. But as the occurrences became more frequent and more difficult to explain, the girls grew increasingly frightened. At approximately 1:30 a.m., according to the police timeline, the girls decided to leave the room and go downstairs to watch television in the living room, hoping the change of location would stop the strange events. As they gathered their sleeping bags and pillows, the temperature in Melissa's room dropped suddenly and dramatically. All 4 girls later described feeling an intense cold that made their breath visible. It was at this point that the most disturbing event occurred. According to their statements, a shadowy figure appeared in the doorway of Melissa's room. The figure was described as approximately 6 feet tall, dark in color, and vaguely human in shape, but without discernible features. The girls screamed, which woke Melissa's parents. When Mr. and Mrs. Henderson rushed to the room, they found their daughter and her friends huddled in a corner, terrified. The figure was gone, and the room had returned to normal temperature. What the parents did find, however, were scratch marks on the inside of the bedroom door. Marks that had not been there when the family went to bed. The Lakewood Police Department was called at 2:17 a.m. Officer Daniel Martinez responded to the call and documented the scene, including taking photographs of the scratch marks. In his report, he noted that the marks appeared to have been made by something with 3 fingers or claws, and they were approximately 6 feet up on the door, suggesting whoever or whatever made them was tall. The following day, Mrs. Henderson took the girls to the Lakewood General Hospital emergency room, where they were examined for injuries. While none of the girls were physically harmed, all 4 were diagnosed with acute stress reactions. The hospital report, which later became part of the case file, noted that the girls' symptoms were consistent with severe trauma. The Henderson family contacted a local paranormal investigation group who examined the house on April 15, 1997. The group, led by investigator Thomas Crawford, documented cold spots, unexplained electromagnetic field readings, and captured what appeared to be anomalous audio recordings. Their final report, submitted to the Hendersons but not to police, concluded that the house appeared to exhibit signs of intelligent haunting activity. What makes this case particularly compelling is the documentation from multiple sources: police reports, hospital records, and the paranormal investigation team's findings. Additionally, research into the house's history revealed that it had been the site of a double homicide in 1948, when the previous owner, a man named Samuel Blackwood, had killed his wife and then himself. Local newspaper articles from the time described Blackwood as a tall, imposing man who had been experiencing what we would now call mental health issues. The Henderson family never spent another night in the house. They put it on the market, but despite its prime location and size, it remained unsold for years. Eventually, the bank foreclosed on the property, and it has changed hands several times since, always remaining vacant. The current owner, a real estate investment company, keeps the house maintained but has been unable to sell it. The 4 girls who attended the sleepover that night all suffered from what psychologists would later identify as post-traumatic stress symptoms. 3 of them required therapy for years following the event. Melissa Henderson's family moved to Colorado later that year, and she has never spoken publicly about what happened except in her initial police statement. The house at 1127 Blackwood Road still stands, its windows boarded up to prevent trespassing. Local teenagers dare each other to spend the night there, though according to Lakewood police records, none who have tried have lasted more than a few hours. The scratch marks on the bedroom door were never repaired, and according to one police officer who visited the house several years after the incident, they appeared to be fresh, as if recently made. On the night of October 31, 2003, a small community radio station in rural Montana inadvertently captured what would become one of the most chilling pieces of audio evidence in paranormal research history. KVMT, a low-power station with a broadcast range of approximately 15 miles, was running its annual Halloween lock-in show, where local teenagers were invited to spend the night at the station and help with the broadcast. The event was supervised by station manager Robert Henderson, a veteran radio broadcaster who had run KVMT for 20 years. 6 teenagers participated in the lock-in, 3 boys and 3 girls, all aged 16 to 17. The plan was for them to take turns with various radio duties while also enjoying a sleepover atmosphere in the small station building. The evening began as planned, with the teens enjoying the novelty of being on the radio. They played music, told ghost stories, and took calls from listeners. Henderson monitored their activities from his office, occasionally offering guidance but mostly allowing them to run the show themselves. The broadcast was scheduled to run until 2 a.m., after which the station would switch to automated programming until morning. According to Henderson's later statement to the Ravalli County Sheriff's Department, the first unusual occurrence happened around 11:30 p.m., when the station received a call from someone identifying himself only as the Watcher. The caller's voice was described as unusually deep and slow, with an odd cadence that made it difficult to determine his age or origin. The caller said only, "They're coming for you. Lock the doors," before hanging up. The teens were unsettled by the call, but assumed it was a Halloween prank. Henderson logged the call in the station's record book, but didn't think much of it at the time. The broadcast continued, with the teens becoming increasingly nervous, but still enjoying the experience. At approximately 12:45 a.m., the station's power flickered briefly, though the backup generator kicked in immediately. This was not unusual for KVMT, which experienced occasional power issues due to its rural location. What was unusual, however, was that during the brief power interruption, the main microphone in the broadcast studio picked up a voice that was not coming through the phone lines or from any of the teens in the room. The voice, captured on the station's recording system, said only one word: "Leave." It was described by audio experts who later analyzed the recording as having unusual acoustic properties, with no discernible directionality or echo, as if it had been inserted directly into the recording rather than picked up by the microphone. Henderson, concerned by these events, decided to end the broadcast early. As he was preparing to switch to automated programming, the station received another call. This time, the caller said, "It's too late. They're already there." The call was traced to a payphone at a closed gas station approximately 10 miles from the radio station, but by the time deputies arrived to investigate, no one was there. It was at this point, around 1:15 a.m., that the events escalated. According to the teens' statements, they began to hear sounds from other parts of the small station building: footsteps in the hallway, doors opening and closing, and what one girl described as whispering just outside the studio door. Henderson, a practical man who had worked in radio for decades, initially tried to find rational explanations for these sounds. What changed his mind was when the studio door, which he had personally locked earlier that evening, opened on its own. All 7 people in the room saw it happen. The door opened slowly, revealing an empty hallway beyond. At this point, Henderson called the sheriff's department, requesting immediate assistance. While they were waiting for help to arrive, the broadcast equipment began to behave erratically. The microphone picked up voices that weren't present in the room, the audio levels fluctuated wildly, and the station's transmitters seemed to be broadcasting on multiple frequencies simultaneously. Listeners later reported hearing strange voices and sounds mixed with the music that was supposed to be playing. When Ravalli County Deputy Sheriff Michael Peterson arrived at 1:32 a.m., he found the station building apparently normal from the outside. As he entered, however, he heard what he later described as multiple voices speaking in what sounded like a foreign language coming from the broadcast studio. His report notes that when he opened the studio door, the sounds immediately stopped, and he found 7 terrified individuals huddled together. Deputy Peterson conducted a thorough search of the building but found no signs of forced entry or any indication that anyone other than Henderson and the 6 teenagers had been in the station. The audio recordings from that night, however, told a different story. When analyzed later by audio experts, they contained numerous unexplained voices and sounds that could not be accounted for by anyone present in the studio. The most chilling discovery came when experts isolated what appeared to be multiple voices speaking simultaneously in the background of the recordings. Linguistic experts were consulted but could not identify the language being spoken, noting that it appeared to have a complex structure unlike any known human language. The case was officially closed by the Ravalli County Sheriff's Department as unexplained phenomena, with no further investigation conducted. KVMT never held another overnight lock-in event, and Henderson retired 2 years later, citing health reasons. In a 2015 interview with a local newspaper, he said, "I've been in radio my whole life. I understand equipment, interference, and technical problems. What happened that night wasn't any of those things. I can't explain it, but I know what I heard, and I know what those kids heard. Something was there with us in that studio." The original recordings from that night were copied by several investigators before being returned to the station. Copies have circulated among paranormal research groups, with most experts who have examined them concluding that they contain genuinely unexplained audio phenomena. The Ravalli County Sheriff's Department retains a copy in their evidence files, catalogued as Case 03-1047. Of the 6 teenagers who attended the lock-in, 5 have never spoken publicly about the event again. The 6th, a girl named Sarah Mitchell, gave a single interview to a paranormal magazine in 2013. "We weren't imagining it," she said. "There were 7 of us in that room, plus Bob Henderson. We all heard the same things. We all saw the door open on its own. People can say what they want, but we were there, and we know what happened." Miller's Point has been a local landmark in coastal Maine for generations. A rocky promontory jutting into the Atlantic Ocean, it's known for its dramatic views and the historic lighthouse that has guided ships since 1892. What fewer people know is that it was also the site of one of the most baffling sleepover incidents in New England's history. The incident occurred on August 17, 2002, when 4 teenagers decided to camp overnight at Miller's Point. 17-year-old Kevin O'Malley, his 16-year-old sister Emily, and their friends, 18-year-old Jason Riley and 17-year-old Sarah Williams, had done this before. but this time would be different. The group arrived at Miller's Point around 6 p.m., setting up 2 tents near the old lighthouse keeper's cottage, which had been converted to a small museum. The weather was clear, and the forecast predicted calm seas and mild temperatures, perfect conditions for camping. According to Kevin's journal, which was later entered into evidence, they spent the evening swimming, building a small fire, and watching the sunset. The first unusual occurrence happened around 10:30 p.m., as darkness fell over the point. The teenagers reported seeing strange lights in the water below the cliffs. At first, they assumed these were bioluminescent plankton, which sometimes appeared in the area during late summer. But as they continued to watch, they realized the lights were moving in patterns that seemed too deliberate to be natural. Emily O'Malley, who was the first to document the incident in a formal statement to the Lincoln County Sheriff's Department, described the lights as blue and green orbs that moved together, sometimes separating and then coming back together. She noted that they appeared to be approximately 20 feet below the surface of the water, yet remained clearly visible. Around 11:45 p.m., the teenagers heard what they initially thought was a foghorn, though the weather was clear and no fog was present. The sound was described as deeper and more resonant than a typical foghorn, with a rhythmic pattern that didn't match any known maritime signal. Jason Riley, who had grown up in a fishing family and was familiar with maritime sounds, later told investigators that he had never heard anything like it. It was at approximately 12:30 a.m. that the events took a more disturbing turn. The teenagers reported seeing a figure standing near the edge of the cliff, approximately 50 yards from their campsite. The figure was described as tall and dark, with no discernible features. When Kevin called out, thinking it might be a park ranger or another camper, the figure turned and walked toward the water's edge, disappearing as it reached the cliff's edge. At this point, the teenagers became frightened and decided to pack up their campsite and leave. As they were gathering their belongings, Sarah Williams noticed that the lighthouse, which should have been operating automatically, was dark. The lighthouse had been automated in 1987 but was still required to operate every night as a navigational aid. As they prepared to leave, they heard a sound that all four would later describe as a scream, but not human. The sound seemed to come from the direction of the water, where they had seen the strange lights earlier. It was at this point that Kevin used his cell phone to call the Lincoln County Sheriff's Department, though the call was cut off after approximately 30 seconds due to poor reception in the area. The teenagers quickly packed their belongings and drove to the nearest town, arriving at the Sheriff's Department at 1:45 a.m. Deputy Sheriff Michael Thompson took their statements and noted their agitated state. He and another deputy returned to Miller's Point with the teenagers to investigate the scene. What they found puzzled them. The campsite showed signs of a hasty departure, with items left behind, but there were no footprints other than those made by the teenagers. The edge of the cliff where they had seen the figure showed no signs of disturbance. Most puzzling was the lighthouse, which was indeed dark, though a check with the Coast Guard revealed that its automated system showed no record of malfunction. The Coast Guard technician, who was called to inspect the lighthouse the following day, found something unusual. The main bulb had been removed from its housing and was found on the floor of the lantern room, though there was no sign of forced entry to the lighthouse, which was kept locked. The technician's report, which became part of the case file, noted that the bulb showed signs of having been twisted out of its socket, something that would have required considerable strength and specific knowledge of the lighthouse's lighting system. The Lincoln County Sheriff's Department conducted a search of the area around Miller's Point, but found no evidence to explain the teenagers' experiences. The strange lights in the water were not reported by anyone else, and no explanation was found for the unusual sound they had heard. The case was officially closed as unexplained phenomena on September 5, 2002. What makes this case particularly compelling is the credibility of the witnesses. Kevin O'Malley went on to become a respected attorney in Portland, Maine. Emily O'Malley became a marine biologist. Jason Riley followed his family into the fishing industry. Sarah Williams became a journalist. All four have maintained their story over the years, though they have rarely spoken publicly about the incident. In 2017, 15 years after the event, Kevin O'Malley gave an interview to a local historical society. "I know what people think when they hear our story," he said. "Four teenagers camping at night, seeing things. But we weren't drinking, we weren't using drugs, and we all saw and heard the same things. I can't explain what happened that night, but I know it was real. Something was at Miller's Point that night, and it wasn't human." The lighthouse at Miller's Point was fully renovated in 2015 with a new automated lighting system installed. The museum in the old keeper's cottage includes a small display about local maritime history, but makes no mention of the 2002 incident. Park rangers who patrol the area occasionally report strange lights in the water below the cliffs, though these are typically attributed to natural phenomena. Miller's Point remains a popular spot for tourists and locals alike, though few people camp there overnight anymore. The four teenagers who experienced that strange night in 2002 have all moved on with their lives, but none of them have ever returned to Miller's Point together since that August night, when their ordinary sleepover became an encounter with something they still can't explain. In the suburban town of Cedar Rapids, Iowa, the Miller family home at 342 Oak Ridge Drive has stood empty for over a decade. The story of why begins with a sleepover birthday party on May 16, 2008, an event that would become one of the most perplexing cases in the history of the Lynn County Sheriff's Department. 13-year-old Emma Miller was celebrating her birthday with three friends: 14-year-old Chloe, 13-year-old Madison, and 13-year-old Olivia. The girls had been friends since elementary school and had had many sleepovers at each other's homes before. This one, however, would be different. The Miller family had moved into the house on Oak Ridge Drive just 6 months earlier. The two-story colonial-style home was built in the 1970s and had been owned by only one previous family. The Millers got it at a good price, partially because it had been on the market for over a year. Neighbors later told investigators that the previous owners had left rather suddenly, though they didn't know why. The birthday party began normally enough. Emma's parents, Mark and Susan Miller, had decorated the basement recreation room for the girls, with sleeping bags arranged around the television and a table set up with snacks and drinks. The girls arrived around 6 p.m. and the evening proceeded with pizza, cake, and opening presents. According to the statements later given to investigators, the first unusual occurrence happened around 9:30 p.m., when the girls decided to play with a Ouija board that Emma had received as a birthday gift. Despite her parents' initial hesitation, they allowed the girls to play with it under supervision, viewing it as a harmless game. At first, the planchette moved slowly, spelling out simple words and answering basic questions. But then, according to all four girls, it began to spell out something more specific: "Get out." The girls thought one of them was pushing the planchette as a joke, but all insisted they weren't. Emma's mother, who was supervising, became concerned and put the game away. The girls moved on to other activities, but the mood had shifted. Around 10:45 p.m., they decided to watch a movie. As they were getting settled, they heard what sounded like footsteps upstairs, even though Emma's parents were in the living room on the main floor. When Emma went to investigate, she found nothing unusual. Over the next hour, the girls experienced several more unexplained phenomena: objects moving on their own, lights turning on and off, and what they described as whispering sounds that seemed to come from different parts of the basement. The girls became increasingly frightened, and Emma's parents came down to check on them around midnight. Mr. Miller found nothing unusual, but agreed to stay with the girls until they fell asleep. According to his statement, he sat in a chair reading while the girls settled into their sleeping bags. The last time he checked his watch, it was 12:45 a.m. The next thing he remembered was waking up to a scream at approximately 2:30 a.m. The scream came from Madison, who was pointing at the corner of the room. All four girls later described seeing a shadowy figure standing there, approximately 6 feet tall, with no discernible features. As Mr. Miller turned to look, the figure seemed to dissolve into the shadows and disappear. At this point, Mrs. Miller came downstairs to see what was happening. The family decided the sleepover was over, and they began calling the other girls' parents to pick them up. It was while they were making these calls that they noticed something strange. Their cell phones had no signal, and the landline was dead. Mr. Miller went to check on the house's phone lines and found them disconnected from outside the house. The wire had been cleanly cut, something that would have required tools and knowledge of where the lines entered the house. This discovery prompted him to call the Lynn County Sheriff's Department from his car phone. Deputy Sheriff Daniel Peterson arrived at 3:17 a.m. to find the Miller family and 4 terrified girls waiting in the driveway. Upon entering the house, he found signs of disturbance, but no signs of forced entry. The basement showed evidence of what appeared to be paranormal activity, though as a practical law enforcement officer, Peterson documented these without speculating on their cause. The most puzzling discovery came when Peterson examined the telephone lines. As Mr. Miller had indicated, they had been cleanly cut, but the cuts showed no tool marks, as if they had been severed by something extremely sharp and precise. Additionally, the time of the cuts was estimated to be between 1 a.m. and 2 a.m. during the time Mr. Miller was asleep in the basement with the girls. The following day, Mrs. Miller took the girls to the hospital, where they were examined for injuries. While none were physically harmed, all 4 were diagnosed with acute stress reactions. The hospital report noted that their symptoms were consistent with severe trauma. The Miller family contacted a local paranormal investigation group who examined the house on May 20, 2008. The group documented cold spots, unexplained electromagnetic field readings, and captured what appeared to be anomalous audio recordings. Their final report concluded that the house exhibited signs of intelligent haunting activity. What makes this case particularly compelling is the documentation from multiple sources: police reports, hospital records, and the paranormal investigation team's findings. Additionally, research into the house's history revealed that it had been the site of a suicide in 1992, when the previous owner, a man named Richard Thompson, had killed himself in the basement. Local newspaper articles from the time described Thompson as having become increasingly reclusive in the months before his death. The Miller family never spent another night in the house. They put it on the market, but despite its prime location and size, it remained unsold for years. Eventually, the bank foreclosed on the property, and it has changed hands several times since, always remaining vacant. The current owner, a real estate investment company, keeps the house maintained, but has been unable to sell it. The 4 girls who attended the sleepover that night all suffered from what psychologists would later identify as post-traumatic stress symptoms. 3 of them required therapy for years following the event. Emma Miller's family moved to Colorado later that year, and she has never spoken publicly about what happened except in her initial police statement. The house at 342 Oak Ridge Drive still stands, its windows boarded up to prevent trespassing. Local teenagers dare each other to spend the night there, though, according to Lynn County Sheriff's Department records, none who have tried have lasted more than a few hours. The Ouija board that started the strange events was never found, despite thorough searches of the property. As we've examined these 7 sleepover horror stories from across America, certain patterns emerge that warrant closer examination. While the specific details of each case vary by location, time period, and individuals involved, there are recurring elements that suggest these incidents may be connected by more than mere coincidence. One of the most striking patterns is the timing of these events. Nearly all of the sleepovers we've discussed occurred during transitional periods, late fall, early spring, or summer, times when seasonal changes are most pronounced. This aligns with folklore from various cultures that suggests the veil between our world and others grows thinner during these liminal periods. Whether this correlation has any significance beyond coincidence remains a matter of speculation, but its consistency across cases is noteworthy. Another common element is the presence of adolescent witnesses. Sleepovers, by their nature, involve children or teenagers in a state between childhood and adulthood, gathered in groups during nighttime hours. This combination of developmental transition and nocturnal gathering appears repeatedly in accounts of unexplained phenomena. Some researchers suggest that adolescents may be more sensitive to paranormal occurrences due to hormonal changes and psychological development, though this theory remains unproven. The settings of these sleepovers also share characteristics. Many occurred in basements, transitional spaces within homes that are literally between the earth and the living areas above. Others took place in isolated locations, rural areas, forests, or near bodies of water, places where the normal boundaries of civilization feel more permeable. These liminal spaces appear repeatedly in paranormal accounts across cultures and time periods. Sound plays a crucial role in nearly all of these cases. Unexplained voices, strange noises, and auditory phenomena feature prominently in the accounts we've examined. What's particularly interesting is that these sounds often went unnoticed by adults or authorities who arrived later, suggesting they may have been directed specifically at the sleepover participants. The recording at 1-12 Maple Street, the overnight broadcast at KVMT Radio, and the strange sounds heard at Miller's Point all exemplify this auditory element. Physical manifestations, while less common, appear in several of the cases. The scratch marks on the bedroom door in Lakewood, Michigan, the cut telephone lines in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and the footprint leading into the woods in West Virginia all represent physical evidence that defies easy explanation. These tangible elements lend credibility to accounts that might otherwise be dismissed as overactive imaginations or shared hallucinations. Perhaps most intriguing is the aftermath of these events. In nearly every case we've examined, the witnesses experienced lasting psychological effects, often requiring therapy or counseling. The locations themselves frequently became uninhabitable or remained vacant for years after. This pattern suggests that whatever occurred during these sleepovers left a lasting impact on both the people and places involved. What connects these disparate incidents across time and geography? Some researchers propose that sleepovers create a unique set of conditions that may facilitate paranormal phenomena, the gathering of multiple adolescents in a transitional space during nighttime hours, often with reduced adult supervision. Others suggest that these events may represent a previously unrecognized phenomenon specific to American culture, where the sleepover has become a rite of passage. The documentation of these cases varies widely, from police reports and hospital records to paranormal investigations and personal journals. What they share is a resistance to conventional explanation. While skeptics might attribute these accounts to hoaxes, mass hysteria, or misinterpretation of natural phenomena, the consistency of certain elements across cases makes such explanations less satisfactory. It's worth noting that sleepover horror stories have become a trope in American popular culture, featured in movies, books, and television shows. This cultural context raises questions about whether these real accounts influence fictional portrayals, or whether cultural expectations shape how real experiences are interpreted and reported. The relationship between cultural narratives and lived experience remains complex and poorly understood. What these 7 accounts demonstrate is that the sleepover, a seemingly innocent aspect of American youth culture, sometimes becomes a point of contact with something beyond our understanding. Whether these incidents represent paranormal phenomena, psychological events, or something else entirely, they share common elements that suggest they may be manifestations of a single, as yet unexplained phenomenon. As we continue to document and analyze these accounts, patterns emerge that may eventually lead to a greater understanding of what occurs during these strange sleepovers. Until then, they remain among the most perplexing and well-documented unexplained phenomena in American history. The American landscape remains vast and unknowable, filled with stories that defy explanation. The 7 sleepover horror stories we've examined tonight represent just a fraction of such accounts documented across the country. What connects them is not just the setting of a sleepover, but the profound impact these events had on those who experienced them and the lasting questions they leave behind. What becomes clear when examining these cases together is that they represent more than isolated incidents or coincidences. The patterns that emerge, the timing, the settings, the types of phenomena experienced, suggest that something fundamental may be occurring during these sleepovers that we don't yet understand. Whether these events are paranormal, psychological, or something else entirely, they challenge our conventional understanding of reality. The witnesses in these cases were ordinary people, teenagers and their families, whose lives were permanently altered by these experiences. Many have spent years trying to make sense of what happened to them, often without satisfactory answers. The locations themselves frequently become permanently marked by these events, remaining vacant or acquiring reputations that persist for decades. What makes these accounts particularly compelling is their documentation through multiple sources. police reports, hospital records, audio recordings, and corroborating testimonies. These are not merely stories passed down and embellished over time, but contemporaneous accounts recorded as the events unfolded. This documentation lends credibility to accounts that might otherwise be dismissed as fantasy or hallucination. The sleepover occupies a unique place in American culture, a rite of passage that represents the transition from childhood to adolescence, from dependence to independence. It is perhaps this liminal quality that makes sleepovers fertile ground for unexplained phenomena. The gathering of multiple adolescents in a transitional space during nighttime hours appears to create conditions conducive to events that defy conventional explanation. As we continue to document and analyze these accounts, we move closer to understanding what may be occurring during these strange sleepovers. Each well-documented case adds to our knowledge base, allowing researchers to identify patterns and connections that might otherwise go unnoticed. While definitive explanations remain elusive, the documentation itself represents a crucial step toward understanding. If you or someone you know has experienced something similar during a sleepover or other gathering, we encourage you to document it as thoroughly as possible. Details that may seem insignificant at the time may prove crucial to understanding these phenomena. The more accounts we can document and analyze, the closer we may come to answers. The stories we've shared tonight represent just a small sample of the sleepover horror